My best friend's mom said, "You can come over every night." I said, "Won't your ex, and your son, get jealous?" The first time she said it, the words slipped out as if they were a careless seam in an otherwise careful garment. It was late, the kind of late that makes streetlights look like candles on a cake the town forgot to blow out. Rain stitched the porch screens with silver threads, and the kitchen behind her smelled like rosemary and laundry soap and the faint sterile tang of a new beginning. Her living room still had that thin, echoing quiet of a house that has just had a door taken off its hinges, her ex's laugh gone from the corners where it used to curl. You don't notice how loud absence is until it keeps you up. Elise was in her late 30s then, though her face was a map that pretended to be younger. The skin around her mouth held the ghost of a smile even when she wasn't smiling. The muscles were trained early by a lifetime of making other people feel safe first. She poured tea and busied herself with 2 mugs because busy hands are the neighbor of composure. Steam fogged her glasses, turned her hazel pupils to small, patient planets. On the table were the old rings left by her ex-husband's coffee. She'd stop scrubbing them soon and accept they were part of the wood now. But that night she still swiped at them with the heel of her hand when she thought I wasn't looking. I wasn't supposed to be there as anything but a friend to her house. I came with cork and a socket set and the defensive weapon of men who don't know what to say, practical skills. Cole, her son and my best friend since middle school, was in Phoenix chasing a job with more future than our town. He asked me to look in on his mom until he could come back for a proper visit. Just keep an eye. Yeah, he said on the phone, the way people say it when they need to delegate their guilt. Come over the next few nights if you want, she said, hands cradling steam the way people cradle a cat, not expecting it to stay. Or every night. I don't sleep much yet. New houses are always noisy after you move furniture. Pipes, floorboards, old noises, new echoes. I tried to make a joke into a rope between us. If I come over every night, won't your ex, and your son, get jealous? It should have landed easy. Instead it hovered. Something in the shape of the room caught it. Turned it honest. Her mouth did the thing it did when the joke cut close to a vein. It pressed into a soft line that nodded to its own truth. Elise lifted the mug, bought herself a sip. They'll manage, she said, not unkindly. They already do. I found the leak under the kitchen sink. A slow betrayal, not enough to flood, just enough to leave the wood swollen and dark as if it had secrets. I replaced the trap, tightened the joints, wiped everything dry and then waited to see the first bright bead form, the plumber's equivalent of lighting a match in daylight to see if it still holds fire. Elise crouched beside me, her knees popping. She watched with what I had come to recognize as a mother's attention, not technical, not indifferent, a kind of reverence for the things that keep a home from falling apart. You always liked fixing things, she said softly, even when you were 14 and the only tool you owned was a butter knife. She remembered that. I remembered it too. Me. The kid who stayed late on their porch because Cole's house had clean light and there was always the sound of someone chopping something essential. My house had a TV that argued with itself and a father who wasn't much of a door. He was a draft. It's easier than fixing people, I said before I could stop the part of me that craves truth like salt. Elise's eyes flicked to mine. Quick, like a bird checking for hawks. Don't tell the plumbers union, she said, offering me a towel. They'll raise your dues. We laughed then, finally, and the room felt less like a jar with the lid twisted on too tight. That first night I stayed to label the breakers in the panel downstairs. Whoever built the house treated electricity like a rumor. I flicked each switch and shouted up what died. Living room, fridge, sorry, freezer, fish sticks okay. The lights flashed on and off like someone practicing Morse for a message they didn't know how to send. Elise would call, got it, and then say, no. Wait, because sometimes the thing you think is the kitchen light is really the hallway. And sometimes the thing you think is grief is actually anger with the labels rubbed off. When I finally put the cover back on, thunder startled the window glass into shivering. Elise walked me to the door but didn't open it. She leaned against the frame like someone who knew that once she moved the moment would be over. Places have gravity. People do too. Thank you, she said. I can pay you for today. And for coming back tomorrow. I shook my head. It's Cole. It's you. It's me. It's a house that would write a Yelp review if I charged her. She showed me that mouth ghost of a smile. It's generous, she said, which is another way to say you want to feel useful. The tone wasn't unkind, just precise. She could read people the way a good nurse reads a monitor. There is the patient's narrative. And then there is the rhythm beneath. I went home through air that tasted like the inside of a coin. The streets were empty, the kind of midnight our town learned from old movies, the pharmacy asleep with its neon eyelid half open. The diner's sign flickering eat 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 like a command we're embarrassed to obey. I lay in bed and listened to my house do its own list of house things, refrigerant whispering. The water heater clearing its throat. My upstairs neighbor's shoes pacing out math problems. 14 hours later I was back with a toolbox that made me look competent. You learn early which props make you plausible. 2 weeks of nights turned into a month of evenings that had the gradually widening ring of routine. If you dropped a stone into a lake each time I left her porch, you could track us from those ripples. Her house learned my tread as if I were a new kind of delivery, brown cardboard. Human-shaped. Some nights we fixed actual things. A stubborn sash that had been painted shut like a lie. A dryer vent so clogged with lint I could have knit her a sweater with the ghosts of laundry. Some nights I only held the instructions while she assembled a bookcase because control, in small forms, is a kind of medicine. I began to know the rooms not only for their function but for their moods. The front room was polite, always ready to receive. The kitchen was honest. If you were going to cry, you did it there, where there were practical surfaces. The hallway at night stretched to twice its length. An optical illusion of grief. When Elise moved, her breath would catch on certain notes. The way a song catches at the place the singer has not yet learned to breathe through. She tried not to let me see it. She failed sometimes. I pretended not to notice sometimes. That's how you love a person you aren't supposed to love. You agree to the choreography that protects them. People noticed, because towns like ours are lean on mysteries. Old man Jenkins, who watched the neighborhood through his Venetian blinds like a ship captain reading the horizon for whales, took to clearing his throat when I parked. Mrs. Carter asked if I liked lemon bars the third time I didn't accept any. Which is how she told me she saw me. Which is how she told me she cared. On Saturday afternoons at the hardware store, men whose hobbies included knowing things asked. Working nights, with voices that made the period into an eyebrow. Cole called every Sunday like a church bell. He would talk long about the desert heat and the way the city made you feel like you were both alone and in the middle of everything. I told him his mom was fine, which was true some days. Other days the word fine felt like a cheap photograph of a fire. And I swallowed that. Good, he'd say, grateful, guilty, proud of himself for having left. We're all a handful of gas pedals and brakes. And sometimes we hit the wrong one. I didn't tell him about the night the ex-husband came by unannounced. The way weather sometimes does. He showed up with the particular squint of men who claim they're better in hindsight. He wore the same aftershave the house still remembered in the rugs. And he stood with feet splayed as if to plant himself back in the soil. We're not doing this, Elise said from the doorway, voice true enough to ring. Not without notice, not without respect. He looked me up and down. He was not a violent man, just one trained in insinuation. This your electrician? He asked. Light, your night nurse. I always did like how generous you were with strays. Elise, I'm not a stray, I said evenly, but the words felt like barking. In our life, generosity looked a lot like loneliness. He didn't look at her when he said it. Which is how you say something you've rehearsed. Eyes on me. Elise had no one to return the line to. She stepped forward then, just enough that he had to shift back and recognize the new architecture of the threshold. You may come and visit Cole's things next weekend. You may not arrive with your old keys and your new mood. She spoke the way nurses speak when the IV must be removed and will hurt less if you keep still. He lifted his hands. "All right," he said, the way a man says it when he needs the audience to know he is reasonable. "All right." He looked at me as if I had been invited to a game he must now play by unfamiliar rules. "Evening," he added, to the air. When he left, the wind took a deep breath. The house held it. I didn't touch Elise for a long time after he left because touch is the easiest lie and the hardest truth. I stood there with an armful of something I couldn't name. She was very still. She had a way of stillness that reminded me of lakes in photographs. The kind that will be rippled in the next frame. But someone had pressed pause on the water. "You okay?" I asked. Because men will always ask that. We prefer problems we can vacuum. She exhaled. Something in her shoulders came back to an ordinary shape. Sometimes I wish people came with labels. Not the warning kind. The gentle kind. Open from this side. Handle with thought. This end up. She smiled at her own foolish tenderness and seemed to forgive it in the same motion. "I'm fine," she added, and we both let that word do the little job it could do. That was the first hinge in the story for me, the X at the door. The line drawn faintly but real. The second came at the neighborhood block party that August, when the sky threw the kind of blue people put on postcards to convince others to move there. I grilled corn with the fathers and learned how to nod at stories about boats I would never own. Elise worked the table with the other moms and women not moms. She pinned paper plates with olives to keep them from flying away and held tiny dogs for people while they drank lemonade too violently. She wore a black sundress that made her look like the cool side of a shadow. She kept finding my eyes the way you keep finding the horizon even when you're looking for storms. Not to flirt, not the way men would later claim. It was a looking like two people checking ground that might have shifted since they last crossed it. When she laughed, her mouth opened the way a child's eyes do the first time they see the ocean, astonishment every time. Even when they know it's coming. Old man Jenkins asked me to help him lift the cooler, and as we hoisted ice, he leaned over with the conspiratorial sway that belongs to the elderly and to teenagers. "You're a good boy," he said, "don't get in your own way." I opened my mouth to ask what he meant. He closed it for me with a look honed by years of not saying everything out loud. "People have their seasons," he added vaguely, "let them have them." If the party had stayed at the level of paper plates and modest gossip, maybe nothing would have tilted. But toward dusk Cole called. Which was to say his voice arrived at the party like a visiting bird and perched in the curve of Elise's ear. She walked away to talk. When she returned, her face had that complicated glow people get when the love they love with is far away. She came toward me smiling, and I could see our town decide in real time what that meant. After the party, after the cleanup, after the Tupperware exchange that is our closest thing to a barter economy, I walked Elise home with the rest of her olives. We stood on her porch, standing in the place where so much of our story would stand. The night was a thick syrup of cut grass and warm bulb light and the tired shuffle of people who had used up their sociability and were happy to be empty. She put the Tupperware down, and before she could make a joke about returning it I said, "You looked happy when he called." "I did," she said simply, which is the most generous way to speak about complicated joy. He has a new friend at work who laughs at his jokes. The right kind of laughing. The kind that says, "Keep going." "Good," I said, and meant it more than I wished I did. The universe keeps receipts of our selfishness. Even the polite kind. Then she did the thing she sometimes did when she wanted to look right at something hard. She stepped closer, until I could see the faint spray of freckles she used to have across her nose. Now as soft as the memory of a summer that tried to leave without paying. "You and I," she said. "We aren't doing anything wrong. But that doesn't mean we can do whatever we like." I nodded and did not touch her. The night put a hand on both our shoulders and told us to go to bed separately like an old auntie who loves us both. Gossip gathered anyway, as gossip does, slowly and then all at once. Like fog that you think is just weather until you realize it is the weather. A cashier at the grocery store asked me how Elise liked the new garbage disposal. She had no reason to know she had a new garbage disposal. I am not proud to admit I said. It's loud, as if that were a secret. The next day a man who works with my stepfather said, I hear you found a new way to call someone, Ma. I laughed because he wanted me to laugh. And then I didn't sleep because I had given my laugh to the wrong farm. If Elise knew, she did not show it. She moved through the world as if she had inherited a church she did not go to. Dusting pews and replacing votive candles because she knew the church mattered to someone. When people spoke to her in the produce aisle, she looked them in the eyes long enough to remind them that eyes are mirrors if you look at them. She did not say more words than were necessary. She loosened the lid of silence enough to pour out only what she chose. One Thursday late, after I had replaced a section of copper pipe that had the weary green of old pennies. After we had shared a soup thick enough to convince anyone that life would continue. We heard a noise like the house clearing its throat. Elise looked up at the ceiling with the practiced annoyance of someone who had learned how to triage. It's the back bedroom window, she said, the latch. It rattles when the wind is wrong. I went down the hallway that doubled itself at night. In the back bedroom, the one that faced the maple that threw leaf shadows like lace. I found the window. The latch trembled as if trying to speak Morse. I pressed my thumb against the cold metal and stilled it. In the reflection on the black glass I saw the shape of a man who looked both too young and too old to be deciding what to do with his life. For a small second, in that cheap mirror the night makes, I imagined someone else's version of the scene, the young man in the woman's house. The door closed, the bed nearby, the quiet like a third person listening. The story writes itself for those who prefer their pens to their eyes. Got it, Elise called softly. Got it. My voice sounded like a word I was trying on in a store. I jimmied the latch with a thin scrap of cardboard and a patience that felt like a prayer. When it stilled for good, I stayed a few breaths longer in that room that held both more air and less than the other rooms. I sat on the edge of the bed, then stood up because sitting there felt like a pact I hadn't earned. When I returned to the kitchen, Elise looked at me the way people look at team captains to find out if the play they chose was the right one. I thought about kissing you, I said abruptly, which was like dropping a plate to see if it would bounce. We were both tired of the long hallway between honesty and discretion. She didn't flinch. Her face became the face of someone who hears a diagnosis and does not yet assign it to her body. I know, she said, a beat. I thought about letting you. The kettle was on, minus steam, the sound of something almost boiling but not there yet. We did not move. Outside, a car passed slow, the way animals pass houses where people are awake after midnight. Respectful. Curious. Does it get to be about more than us? I asked. I mean, Cole, and that man who was here, and everybody with their paper plates. Love always gets to be about more than two people, she said, even when it isn't love. That's what no one tells you when you're young in the good way. She smiled a little. Life is a town. Even in a city, life is a town. We put the plates in the dishwasher and our hearts somewhere less convenient. The night ended without ceremony, and I walked home under a sky that looked like the bottom of a river, stones and dark and the sense of movement even when everything appears still. Cole showed up 2 weeks later with the desert on his skin. He hugged me at my door like we were still 17 and had never heard the word consequence. He hugged his mother at her door like a man shakes a tree to see if fruit falls. It did. She cried in the good way and the bad way. All mixed. We ate noodles with too much basil because she had forgotten to buy the right kind and pretended it was a recipe from somewhere important. After dinner, Cole asked me to go for a drive. We idled in the middle school parking lot where we once taught each other how to parallel park using traffic cones and faith. Cole drummed the steering wheel. That was always his preamble. People have been saying things, he said finally, aiming his eyes at the kind of distance you select when the words you're carrying don't fit in the car. About you and my mom. He said the word mom carefully, as if it were a glass he could either drink from or drop. I could have lied with a careful truth. We've been spending time because of the house. The kind of sentence carefully crocheted to cover a hole without pretending there is no hole. Instead I said, people don't know what they're saying. which means both that they're wrong and that they haven't earned the right to be right. I don't care what they think, he said, which is the thing people say right before they tell you what they think about what they think. I care what's real. He pinched the bridge of his nose, sighed, and I care about not losing the two people who know where I keep my worst stories. He turned to me then, the dashboard lights making him look like a boy again and a stranger. Are you in love with her? There are questions that feel like thieves. They arrive willing to kick a door if you don't open it. I love her, I said, saying the thing I owned. She has been a kind of home since I was a kid. And now she's herself. And I am myself. We are trying to treat that fact like a dog that needs a gentle leash. Answer the question. He gave me the rope men give each other, rough, strong, meant to pull someone out of a ditch. I don't know yet, I said. It was both cowardice and bravery. Depending on the light, I know I want her to be okay. Not because it would fix me, but because her okayness would be something honest in a world that sometimes pays you to lie. I felt like I was auditioning for a play in which I had already been cast. Cole sat with that. He has always had a talent for letting a truth ripen in the air. And if it turns into love? He asked. Voice so soft the word love floated between us like a bubble that could pop if either of us breathed wrong. Then we talk again, I said. My hands were very still on my knees. With you, with her, before the town gets to write our story for us. He closed his eyes and nodded. Okay, he said. Okay, the second one was the one he meant. I don't get to be the sheriff of her freedom. He added, even if I feel like I should get a badge for trying. He laughed then, but his laugh sounded like a man breaking twigs to start a fire in rain. When we returned, Elise was on the porch with 2 mugs and that look people wear after they've decided not to eavesdrop. She looked at Cole first. As you do. He kissed her hair. Then he looked at me the way men look at the horizon when they're teaching someone to sail. To check what the wind is doing to the water. We're good, he said, and sat. She handed him a mug. While they talked about the heat and the way cactus flowers look like mistakes that turned out to be miracles. I watched the way her face rearranged itself around his presence. The way a house rearranges when the right piece of furniture returns to the right room. It would be cleaner if the story could jump now to the part where we made a noble decision and the town applauded politely. But we are people, not a lesson. Things got messier. A man from the ex-husband's bowling team decided to make a joke about me at the diner. And the joke migrated like a weed and picked up friends on the way. Night Plumber, they called me, which is not a clever phrase until it has been said 3 times. You could see the cashier's mouth tighten the way some people tighten lids. The cook kept his hands steady. The waitress brought me my coffee refill because you always do the ordinary kindnesses when the big ones are too expensive for the day. I told Elise about the joke. She made her face quiet. I can call the owner, she said, which was both not the point and perfectly the point. I can choose to spend my money elsewhere. She took my hand then, but in a way that felt like placing a tool in a colleague's palm. Let's make our lives expensive in the direction that frees us. Her grip was warm, not romantic, or maybe romantic in the old sense, brave. She started seeing a counselor. She told me this as one tells a neighbor what days the trash goes out. Tuesday afternoon, she said lightly, and then, honest, I am tired of being brave only after the fact. She came home after those appointments quiet and radiant in a strange, human way, like the air after a thunderstorm. I would fix a thing she pointed at and then sit while she told me about names for feelings that had previously only been the house's noises. One evening her ex came again, this time with a folder under his arm like authority. He was courteous the way law can be courteous when it has no real power. He asked to see old photos. Claimed he wanted to take a few for a family album. When Elise hesitated, he said, "They're my memories too." She let him in because fairness is a reflex for people like her. He flipped through the photos with an ownership that looked like handling evidence. He chose a few, paused on one where the 3 of them were in the yard. Cole small as an idea. The sun giving them halos they hadn't asked for. The ex touched the edge of the picture with his thumb as if it were a wound. then slid it back into the stack. "I'll leave that one," he said. On his way out he stopped near me. "You think you're helping," he said mildly, "but you're building a bridge to something you can't cross. Or a bridge for her to leave the island you built," I said before I could polish it into something inoffensive. He considered me with that cool, competent malice of men who have spent time practicing politesse as a weapon. "If you loved her, really loved her," he said, "you'd stop letting people talk. That's not how mouths work," I said, and he smirked because my answer pleased him. Angry, young, a little unshaven truth. He left without slamming a door, which is the cruelest way to leave sometimes. What changed things finally was not a conversation but a flood. In September we had the kind of rain that makes ditches into brooks and brooks into phone calls to the city that go unanswered. The storm drains at Elise's corner backed up, and the water pressed itself under her back door like a crowd at a sale. I got the call at 2 in the morning. I arrived with a shop vac and sandbags. And we worked the water back into itself. A bucket brigade of 2. The kitchen floor wore a cold skin that made our voices small. We saved the rugs and the bottom row of books because you always save the obvious things first. Then we saved the photos because the obvious things will eventually take care of themselves and paper will not. It was 4 before the water relented. The sky yawning apology. We sat on the counter like teenagers. Our feet dangled above a damp world. Elise laughed then, a little wild, delirious. "I feel 19, she said, "except now I know better what I'm doing." "You knew then too," I said, meaning it. Knowing and being permitted to act on knowledge are different sports. She was about to answer when Cole arrived, called by a neighbor who had seen our lights. He looked at the wet floor. The 2 of us on the counter. The buckets like dull soldiers. His mouth quirked in the direction of a smile, not because he found the scene funny but because he understood that you sometimes say hello to a hard scene with a joke so it won't think you're afraid. He grabbed a mop. The 3 of us worked until the sun was an idea we could believe in. When we finally stopped, we looked at each other the way marathoners do at mile 20, an intimacy forged by an effort no one wanted to make. We ate toast made from the top slices of loaves, the heels, because all the good plates were drying against the backsplash like fish. Elise had the kind of exhaustion that makes your face look like the person you will be when you're old, honest. Unarmed, a little holy, Cole laid his hand on hers. "You raised me to help," he said simply, "and you raised him to help too." He nodded toward me, and that small generosity broke the seal on the room. Elise's eyes filled and spilled, not with tragedy but with release. Some tears have weight to them not because they announce sorrow but because they pay down debt. After the flood, no one cared much anymore about my car in her driveway. It's remarkable how quickly scandal loses to mold. The town returned to counting its own beans. When someone at the diner tried the "night plumber" line again, the waitress banged a coffee pot down hard enough to make a point and said, "Day plumber, night plumber, either way my sink will work when he's done." And everyone laughed the way towns laugh when they have chosen a side and are practicing their relief. Our story did not become a romance with the doors locked and the world outside begging to be nothing. It became a careful companionship that was made of errands and the small menu of intimacies that respect permits, wrists touched in kitchens. Jokes that no one else would find as funny as we did. The occasional leaning of a head into a shoulder that lasted as long as a kettle takes to scream. Sometimes I would leave and think, this is what love looks like when it refuses to audition for anyone else's applause. Sometimes I would lie awake and think, or maybe this is cowardice with excellent manners. I could tolerate not knowing which as long as Elise looked at me the way she looked at me, balanced. Grateful, alive to the facts. Winter arrived with the halogen brightness of intention. Snow made every roof credible. We walked sometimes through the white like 2 parentheses containing a conversation only we could hear. Elise got a new job managing the clinic schedule. She learned the names of patients' grandchildren the way some people collect stamps. She pressed breath into the day like a teacher blows into a whistle at recess, not to end the play, but to make space for it to begin again tomorrow. One night in January we sat on the floor of the living room because the couch seemed tired. The diffuser hummed some scent that claimed to be cedar. Elise showed me a postcard from Cole. A desert dawn and a line that read, "Wish you could see this. Wish you could see me seeing this." She put the card back on the mantel with the care you reserve for a fragile gift from someone you're still learning how to believe in. "He's good," she said. "He is," I said, and we both let that uncomplicated truth warm us like a heater that does not complain. She looked at me then with an attention that made me hold my breath. "Do you think we're lying?" she asked. "To ourselves, to him, to the town. You can pick the order." "I think we're telling the truth we can afford," I said, and when her face did that brave thing where it shows its wounds without apologizing for the sight of them, I added, "I think someday we may be able to afford more." She leaned her head back against the wall and laughed. Which is the sound of someone spending the currency of their courage and finding it has a better exchange rate than expected. "Do you think," she said, "that if this were a story, people would be patient with us? Or would they need us to ruin something for the sake of plot?" "I think if this were a story," I said, "the writer would worry about being accused of cowardice if we didn't kiss. And if we did, the writer would worry about being accused of cliché." We grinned at each other across the carpet where a sunbeam would lie some other afternoon. "Poor writer," she said. "Either way, guilty. We did kiss, once. It happened in March, the month that is a throat clearing. A late snow had fallen, and I was on her porch with a shovel, the old kind with a wood handle that had known many hands. When I finished, she opened the door in a sweater that smelled like the story of pine. I stamped my boots, and she reached to brush snow from my hair the way we brush ashes from a candle we've blown out. The brush became a hold. The hold became a pause. And the pause became a kiss so honest it startled me into laughing against her mouth. She laughed too and stepped back, eyes bright with both the thing beyond joy and the fear that guards it. "We are two people," she said softly, "who have earned tenderness." "We are," I said, and the snow brightened the world into one of those days that will always be white in memory even if it was mostly gray. We stood there with our cheeks flushed from both weather and other weather. When we pulled apart it was not with guilt but with a resolve that has nothing to do with denial and everything to do with fidelity to all versions of ourselves. We did not kiss again for a long time, not because the kiss was wrong, but because it had told us something that did not require more kissing to be believed. Spring let the ground go. The maple outside her back bedroom drew lace again on the wall. Cole called to say he had met someone who made him want to build a home that had windows. "She's not afraid of drafts," he said, which is how he told me he was less afraid too. "When I told her about you and Mom, she said, 'That sounds like family, not gossip.'" He laughed. "The sound easy. I like her." "Me too," I said, relieved by the kind of good news that feels like you've been holding a wall up by yourself and someone finally arrives with a beam. Elise and I cooked on Sundays together. We burned the first batch of pancakes and called them blacksmith cakes. We sat sometimes without talking and watched the light move across the floor as if the house were a sundial and we the shadow history was measuring. When she cried, she did it like a person emptying a drawer onto the bed to sort. Nothing was thrown away. But everything was looked at more honestly than before. When I cried, which I do with less grace, she handed me a napkin the way people hand each other tour guides in foreign cities. "Here. This might help, even if it can't teach you the language of all the streets." On my birthday she gave me a set of chisels that had belonged to her father. She said she had thought of selling them during the divorce, but something in her had resisted that particular surrender. "Tools know when they are wanted," she said, and when I held them, I felt the old wood handles warm like small animals in my palm. Summer returned with its honest heat and its lying thunderheads that threaten all day and deliver at night. Elise's garden did the thing gardens do when tended by someone who knows both patience and joy. I built her a trellis while she told me about a patient who had finally learned to call his pain by its right name. "It changes the shape of the room," she said, moving her hands, "when you name a thing without apologizing to it for existing." We both looked at the sky, then the way people who have survived look at a future they might not have. And both choose and get to have. Sometimes she would catch me watching her and tilt her head. A question without words. I'm collecting proofs. I'd say that this is real, that I am not dream bragging about a life that is kinder than most people get. You will not be able to prove this to anyone who hasn't felt their own version. She'd say, not unkindly, but you can prove it to yourself by remembering how you behaved when the proving felt necessary. We went to the diner on Thursdays and sat at the counter. The cook would put an extra slice of tomato on her BLT because human economies always find a way to bend toward generosity. The waitress would pour my coffee before I asked because habit is another word for love when you do it on purpose. Sometimes the men at the end of the counter would talk louder and sometimes they would talk softer. But they always talked, and we let them, because we were busy living. Years from now, if someone asks me when exactly the story turned from careful to simply true, I will say it happened on an ordinary Tuesday when the sky was a flat blue sheet and we were both too busy to notice beauty. Elise was at the sink rinsing blueberries in a colander that had a dent like a dimple. I was installing shelves in the pantry because it had been built by optimists who thought food could gracefully stack on nothing. She looked up and said, "I am no longer afraid of being seen with you when fear is not required." The sentence landed the way a plane lands with both grace and physics, wheels meeting ground. A little bump, then the old miracle of friction doing its job. We drove to the park and held hands like people who had always meant to. No one cared, or the people who cared in the way you care about the weather. You check it. You complain, and then you go live under it. Cole visited the next month with the woman from the desert and kissed us both on the cheek and asked if we needed light bulbs changed. Which is the kind of generosity I recognize as blood memory. Elise's ex remarried a woman who likes hiking and says namaste after yoga class. He waved once, across a farmer's market stall, and I waved back, and the wave stayed in the air a few seconds longer than it needed to. Which felt like both apology and grace. Every now and then I hear the echo of my own joke from that first night. The one that grew spines because it accidentally spoke two truths. Won't your ex get jealous? Won't your son get jealous? Jealousy, it turned out, was a person in our town like anyone else. He showed up at events. He had a laugh. He needed attention sometimes. And if you did not feed him, he wandered off to eat the headlines. We fed each other instead, soup. Stories, silence, the small and holy kindness of holding someone's eye when a room tries to make them look away. I still fix things for Elise. The shelves I built still carry the weight they were asked to. Though sometimes a jar will complain and we will get to feel useful again. The maple still draws lace on that back bedroom wall, and some nights I stand there and think about the version of me who sat on the edge of the bed and then stood up. I am grateful to him the way you are grateful to any ancestor who could have made a different mistake and didn't. I am not naive about how close we walked to some ledges. But I also know that love is not only the absence of falling. It is the art of learning where to put your feet. When people ask me what the hardest part of the story was, I tell them it was learning to live without an audience. I do not mean secrecy. I mean the practice of arranging your face for the person you are with. Not for the people who might be watching. I mean building shelves on Tuesday because Tuesday asked and not because Thursday requires a story to tell. I mean letting a kiss be a true thing that does not need to be defended in court. On the anniversary of the flood we made pancakes again and burned only the first one. We ate on the porch while rain rehearsed in the distance. Elise leaned her head on my shoulder the way people do who know their own weight and trust you to carry it for a sentence or two. You could come over every night, she said, smiling at herself, at the past, at the kitchen where a young man once crouched under a sink trying to decide who to be. I think I will, I said, and when I don't, I'll call, and when I can't, I'll fix that too. I kissed her hair the way you kiss a place you have promised to water. We sat there and did the ordinary thing of being content, which is louder in a life like mine than any of the doors I have repaired. The town's lights came on in sequence. Candles again, nobody to blow 'em out. Somewhere a kid learned to ride a bike and a dog barked at its own faith in the moon. Somewhere a man told a joke he hoped would make people feel big. And maybe it worked. And maybe it didn't. In our small house on our small street, the latch on the back bedroom window did not rattle in the wind. I had shimmed it a long time ago. It still holds.